so I have to switch my husband for kids. So sorry about that. So call the meeting to order. You just got the recording going. Thank you so much. Just to keep moving, I'll read the land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of a rich and diverse group of Native peoples who have called this area home for more than 10,000 years. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the descendants of these Native peoples who are still here today. Everybody get a chance to look at the agenda. I know we kind of had some emails swirling around, so hopefully no surprises there. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as is?
Approve the agenda.
Second?
I second.
All those in favor? All right. So did you guys get a chance to look at the January 14th meeting minutes? Yeah, was there any, feel free to call out any edits or changes that you might have had. And if not, would love a motion to approve if you're comfortable with the language.
Motion to approve the minutes for January 14th.
Thanks, Yanni. Any second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, moves. All right, March meeting date. We're looking at, let me pull up my calendar here, March 11th. So far, is everyone okay with that date? Or any issues there?
I'll have to miss that date. I'll be like that.
I think that I heard Sam say he was going to be absent. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. We'll miss you. Anyone else? Okay, should have a quorum. Cool. Is there anybody in the room? Any public comments or anyone?
None.
None. Okay. Great. Then we'll turn it over to Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you. Good evening. We wanted to cover a couple things that the council has been talking about. Most recently, we did see the survey results, no question about the financial situation for the city. And those survey results are online. And I think the takeaway on it would be that the public is supportive of increases in our revenue, provided that there are clear plans that adequately describe what's being proposed. So it's something that the council will take up in upcoming sessions, but it's an opportunity now to see how our citizens view what we're doing as a city. The other is that we have a council retreat next month, and the topics that we're going to be focused on include the goals that we talked about from last year. So we'll revisit the goals from our last retreat last year, which include develop a mobility infrastructure program that includes roads, sidewalks, walkways. And such a program should consider safety, physical impacts, as well as equity and opportunities for creating connections around the city. Another goal is to hire grant and GIS employees and to create detailed data on a range of projects and issues that would increase our ability to acquire grants. Another one is to increase the availability of housing, which is a topic that the Planning Commission is taking up right now, with an emphasis on affordability, diversity, and increased ADUs. Such an initiative could include the creation of a land bank, trade options, and other ways to acquire schools, or create a financial stability plan using a process that includes citizen committees, outreach, and community education consideration of a range of ways to enhance revenue and as well as expenditure efficiencies for the city. And then 5, improve multimodal safety through the collection and analysis of safety data. We also talked about our fleet inventory. So we will be talking about that further next month to see if there are opportunities with our existing funding to replace some of our older vehicles, both in public works as well as we'll give consideration to if can we do something now, or should this be put into a levy for future consideration to our citizens. So that's one. Any questions?
No questions, sounds like. Great, thank you. Okay. We wanna jump right into middle housing? Zoe?
All right, yeah, I can take off from here. Hi, everybody. I know it's been a while since I've been the one to attend, so thank you for having me. We sent along several different items in the pack of materials, and today we were hoping to have more of a free-flowing conversation on the specifics regarding like the different topics we need to address throughout these. I have a list next to me of 6 different items I know I need to get through on my side with decisions from you all, and really where the priorities of this group are can flow as needed. But I just wanted to get a feeler of the room now if there was a specific topic that stood out in the materials that was sent over that folks either had questions on, wanted to address first, or prioritize speaking time on before we really dive in.
Yeah, oh, go ahead, Yanni.
I was just gonna say that I found a lot of questions on the suggested possible policies around ADUs. I have a lot of questions there.
Okay. Ashton?
Yeah, the other item I was just gonna say, I mean, just to pick up back from where we left off last month, and other council members had weighed in, and I think we've all taken it away to talk about, you know, what's our comfort around density and the options that you guys had spent. We spent a lot of time unpacking that, and I think that is probably a top priority there to kind of talk through that as well.
Okay.
Like the overriding conversation to have, actually.
What was that? Sorry.
It's like the number one conversation to have, because for me, everything else is.
Yeah.
That's a subject.
Totally agreed. And I think, I don't know if you guys had enough time, but you probably saw Maddie's comments come through as well.
I did, yeah.
Okay.
I briefly scanned them ahead of this meeting, but and I have not fully dove into them as much.
Okay. And Sam, thanks for sending your comments to ahead. You're also there to verbalize anything, but thank you for that.
If it sounds good to the group, then I think diving into the conversations on the options route first seems beneficial to make best use of our time. I do have, well, that document is open on one of these tabs, so please excuse me for a moment as I find it and at least just share my screen for folks to see.
I think I have it on page 17. Is that right?
This is what I have it. Yeah, it's probably on 17.
Cool.
I know the approach that we have taken with the code amendments themselves are to start with option 1, which is just the baseline requirements of what the state is requiring in the middle housing legislation. And that's just to cover pure requirements. And through conversations of what I heard happened in the last meeting is that option 2 and 3 were those that seem to be more of what folks were leaning on, but of course, saving this conversation till now of where everybody's at would be helpful.
Yeah, and I guess I would just say I'll certainly open it up to the room, but since that last meeting, there's been additional conversation around it and some time to marinate on it. And so I think what might be helpful, is I get the impression that consultants, you guys are suggesting more of that option 2 or 3 to do something above and beyond what we're required, and would like to understand just a little bit better again why you guys feel that that is completely necessary.
I mean, because this discussion guide was done by Leland, a sub-consultant of ours, and it tends to be the mindset that the state's already gravitating towards needing to address more housing overall. So already prepping for it is being a bit proactive, while option 1 is in that we're doing what's required and just covering and stopping there. But from our own perspective at SCJ, covering option one on a short timeline is beneficial in that you can address option 2 and 3 like down the road later, not as part of the quick timeline that Commerce wants to see with a lot of these ordinance updates. And the model ordinance doesn't work for every jurisdiction. So that's a little bit of like where we stand on that.
Okay, that's super helpful, because I think, I mean, sorry to take over, guys. I'll just share one more thing and then open it up to the room. But I think that's helpful perspective, just given that we don't have any flexibility on this deadline. Like, I think that was pretty established that we have to do something. And so although there is a lot of consideration and suggestions to further expand, we simply just don't have the time. And so that kind of makes me in particular nervous of saying, hey, let's just do more without a full study of what the unintended consequences could be. And so if we are going to be afforded more time down the road, should it change, I think that seems wise to just investigate it between now and then when we have to, rather than trying to make a snap decision without having all the details and parameters in front of us. So from my perspective, I do sounds like kind of think in line with you over at SJC about SCJ. Sorry, I'm dyslexic apparently. That option one seems like where we're checking the box, we're doing what we need to do, and then should we expand further down the road, we have the full opportunity to do that. We don't have a deadline in front of us for that. Any thoughts in the room?
Yeah, but I think we also need to signal to council what we're thinking beyond the minimum. I just don't think the minimum is going to cut it. I appreciate the deadline focus and the options 2 and 3, like, are they exactly right? I'm not so sure. But as I've shared in this space before, I'd really like to see us discuss, which we are running out of time to do, bonuses for things like small scale housing, cottage housing, things like that, where I could see option 1, but with density bonuses, possibly anywhere, or maybe we want to limit it. If we see the types of housing that I at least am hearing that people want to see, it's more affordable, smaller scale homes. Why wouldn't we want to create some incentives for that? I don't feel like we have time to really have that discussion, but I want the council to hear what we think about that. Whether we, as a group, decide we don't even want to talk about that, or we say, you know what, here's some things we want to explore with more time.
And I think that's, at the last conversation, that's, at least in my impression was, is that that's what we left. It's like, it's either option 1 or it's nothing at all. Right? I mean, I shouldn't say it that way, but it's, option 1, what I heard from a few of us is that option 1 was it's the most that we want. Okay. But then I think that, then I also heard that there was some interest in 1.5 option. And I'm not sure if that 1.5 option is, I don't see it there. All I see is option 2 and 3. And then I think what I heard you say, Zoe, is that your understanding is that that we were okay with just going ahead with option 2 or 3. Which is not what was decided in last meeting.
From my understanding, the previous meeting is that it was really more of the discussion surrounding 2 and 3 was where things had been left off. I'm not quite sure why 1 and 4 are crossed out, because I know from our end, when we're making the code amendments within the document itself, we're covering 1 as our primary focus, and then receiving direction from you all as to anything else.
So, oh yeah, Sam.
So I think, building off of what David was just saying, I think at the last meeting, a majority of the commissioners present said option 1 was the option that they were inclined to support, but they were interested in hearing, and I expressed this directly at the last meeting. I was interested in hearing an option 1.5 that allowed for bonus development or additional density if there was some tie to affordability, because nothing that Leland has proposed so far addresses that. We discussed that at the last meeting. We discussed it many months ago with Leland. When we first discussed middle housing, we asked them to do some research and to come up with some recommendations about what other municipalities are doing for affordable housing. And in House Bill 1110, it has those options for bigger size cities to have deed restrictions for affordability for 50 years. And we heard at this commission last year from the Community Land Trust group that came and met with us, how that model can work and increase access to housing for first-time home buyers and for underrepresented people trying to get into housing. And so I think there's, you know, to Yane's point, I think there is interest of this commission in seeing options for what we could do to increase affordability. We don't, I speak for myself, and I think Maddie makes these comments as well in what was shared this evening. You know, we don't just, some of us don't just want density for the sake of density. We want some tie to affordability so that we don't just become, you know, another shoreline or another urban sprawl with everything torn down. That's my feeling. So if there's options to see what that might look like, that would be great. If there aren't, and if time is short, my hope would be we do option one and then we come back to this, perhaps with some recommendations from Leland or otherwise, and we telegraph to the council, as Councilmember Legal was just talking about. The council's very interested in what we could be doing on affordable housing. I'd love for us to explore that and come up with some options, but not just say, you know, tear down a $700,000 home, put three $1.5 million homes on the lot like happened down the street from me, and call that good for the sake of good.
So if at, let's say, the March meeting, we had a discussion on affordability as a piece for this on top of the one to do that 1.5, like 1 plus affordability, would that feel helpful?
I think, oh, go ahead, Meredith.
You know, I had brought up some things last meeting, and I really do think that we are in a time crunch now where I think we should focus on getting one through. And I personally would love to, I have more of a philosophy of, you know, letting the market play out as opposed to, you know, managing things, but that can be a different discussion. And I really like Yane's idea of going and looking at those frontage requirements, that maybe we could, you know, allow subdivision of land in that way. That would, you know, be a more comfortable way for me to expand density that would be still in the parameters of, you know, of our city as it is. So I think that we should focus on getting one through, because with the timeline and having to get it to council, I just don't see us really being able to take another meeting for us to be deciding what to do, and then have to also come up with the actual nuts and bolts of how that will be in the language. There's just not the time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And tell me if you guys are in agreement with that. I think that the room consensus is that we want to get more knowledgeable on the matter of density as it ties to affordability. We want more time to really explore that. And I think as a group, you know, that's our due diligence. That's what we're supposed to do. Obviously the council's interested in it, and it's our charge to be that kind of sounding board and to work on that. The only thing that we are missing is time. And so I know that we put together a list of things that we want to work on next, that being one of them. Maybe because this is just such a high topic, that this is like priority top list for as soon as we get some breathing room to talk about that. So with that, then knowing that we don't have the time to unpack these things, is the room comfortable? Is this commission comfortable with sticking to option one of doing what we're required at this time so we can move on?
One point of clarification, maybe this is for the consultant, but when I read these options in the paragraph above it, which references HB 1110, says units. So that to me does not include any ADUs we might discuss. These are units per HB 1110, which is to say you can't discriminate on the second unit. It has to have all the rights of the first unit. So these are units. These are not house plus ADU. Do we all agree that that's true? Because I think there's a separate conversation about ADUs and some of the recommendations that the consultants made in this packet, that some of which make me pretty uncomfortable.
Didn't it say that if you go the duplex way, then you kind of forfeit the ADU cap?
That's what the consultant packet says. That's
Right.
not what the code says, and I totally disagree with that, just to be clear. So all I'm saying is, I'll support this option one with channeling to council what we want to work on. But this is about, we're saying option one, just limit middle housing to two, basically equivalent, 2 units with all the rights of a unit, as House Bill says, then I'm fine with that. But then we need to discuss the ADU piece.
Because I don't know if you know that, we talked about this at an earlier meeting, and I think Leland had mentioned this was very early on. They had mentioned they were waiting on clarification from Commerce about whether the interplay of all these new laws means you need to allow 2 units plus ADUs on each unit, or whether that was optionality. Do we have an answer to that?
We have guidance from Commerce on what the bare minimum requirement is versus what could happen. And this is where it's a policy call by cities on what they would like to proceed with. The bare minimum requirement for Commerce with the interaction between 1337 and 1110 is currently, which could also get changed because it's policy interpretation, it's that gray area, that the unit density of 2 units per lot would be single family and 2 ADUs as the max, or a duplex of sorts. However, cities can choose to go beyond that if it's with I can't remember the specific language, but essentially not grouping ADUs within that 2 unit density definition, like interpretation there. So you could go the route of duplex plus ADUs if you'd like. It's just that's the call on cities. And I think within the code that we wrote up, we went with the bare minimum, and it's for you all to decide whether there's more there or not. Does that make sense to the group?
Yeah, it would be nice to have, it sounds like it's still gray, so exactly what the requirement is, but we'll go with it.
Yanni, would you clarify, because I'm not quite sure, will you tell me what exactly you want?
Yeah, and I don't know if we were gonna wait till we got to the ADU section of the packet, but what I'm saying is I am not at this point agreeing that we should say, if you put a middle housing unit, then you don't get to have ADUs. I'm not there at all. I think it creates, first of all, I feel like it's kind of a workaround. We already allow ADUs, right? So, and many cities do. It's a workaround the state's new mandate, say, okay, we'll allow duplex, but then no ADUs. Like, we haven't increased unit count at all. And what do we do for properties that already have an ADU? What do you tell them? What do they get to do now? Nothing. So to me, the legislature's message was, we need to allow at least 2. And if units in your city have a right to build ADUs, then both of those have right to build ADUs. What I see in this packet is, let's split the baby, turtle term, sorry. But to say, oh, but if you choose to build a duplex, then that's it. So we're taking away something we've already allowed because somebody chose to exercise a right that the state's saying. So I can be voted down. That's fine, but I am not in agreement with that. So I just want to be clear about that.
Well, you could look at it just like there's now another option that it's, you now have a different option. You can go the AD route, or you can go but I'm willing to think about that, especially if we keep all of the metrics the same, parking spaces, lot coverage, that kind of thing, you know, if, anyway, that's.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
One other question that I had, and maybe we already answered it, but once the two properties are on, they can't be then completely separated and then separated again. And kind of like
Subdivided.
for me, is that right? So
Subdivided, right?
one is it's one and done, like each parcel, once you put two, that's it, they can't become separately owned things that then can be separated again.
This is where it gets tricky with the subdivision language that we included within the packet materials, in that they can be separately owned, but currently not also split later. So it's not like a Russian nesting doll of just like smaller and smaller lots. It's just like they can be separated into zero lot line subdivisions. This is like my weaker area of policy, so please forgive me here, but I'm going to do my best to try to explain this complex topic of just them being split in half so you can own them as separate units. Like as an individual, I could be owning one of the units inside a duplex and that land with it, but I wouldn't be able to then separate that out further.
So to Meredith's answer is that correct, you cannot do it multiple times to just keep getting smaller and smaller, right? Okay.
I do have a slide from a different presentation I gave with the community on the commerce guidance regarding the ADUs, if folks would like to see it.
Are we ready to dive into that? 'Cause it
Yeah,
sounds like we have a consensus with that option one, with the caveat on let's talk about ADUs, just to split that hair on, is it include the ADUs or not? We good with that? Cool.
Okay, was that head nods?
That's
Okay.
those were
Okay, I saw thumbs up, so I'll just share real quick on this. This is just a graphic showing what I was trying to display. This was from the state model ordinance of where it goes to the ADU conversation, and then this is the route that Commerce has given as like the bare minimum requirement. So this was for a different group on how they're approaching it, but I was going to say, this is one of the things that we will need a decision on as to how to proceed. If we're talking bare minimum, or if we're going duplex and an ADU or two ADUs, that is a key piece of this for what language is made in the code. Just need to marinate on it. That is also fine.
other people have views on that. Yeah, they shared this, you do others have thoughts.
So Yana, your concern was, you know, there are already people that have this situation and we don't want to put them into twilight zone of, you know, not being able to then take advantage of having a second. Are there other, you know, things you've heard or?
Yeah, the other
pros on
concern I
that
have
side?
is that, especially given the size of our lots, like, let's just face it, even our smallest single family, or whatever we're calling it now, are big by regional standards. We're doing nothing really for affordability if we just say you can have two units, nothing. Because you could have two, you know, I mean, that doesn't mean that no affordable units would happen. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we're not compelling anything affordable. It's saying, oh, you can put two lots on your 15,000 square foot lot. Woohoo, you know, that's nothing. ADUs can be affordable housing. And as I said earlier, I'd want us to talk about things like cottage and whatnot, density bonuses later. But I just don't feel like we're only meeting, I mean, it's like not just the minimum, but the minimum in the context that we're in. which is a city with unusually large lots, and saying no to ADUs if there's 2 units, I just don't agree with that. I think ADUs, I mean, I've seen some fantastic ADU developments in Seattle and other places where it's like there's main house, maybe a couple of ADUs, or 2, and then 2 ADUs that look fantastic and they look livable and they're affordable. I've been talking to, friends who are realtors and stuff, and they're like, oh my God, we can do these, we're doing all these amazing, creative, attractive, developments that combine scales. And I'm gonna be disappointed if we just, kind of say LP is gonna do the absolute minimum, given the real estate that we have here, how big our lots are across the city. I think that's gonna be disappointing.
I
I don't think
agree,
it's gonna
because
attract
I
any-
was all
Thank you.
for option 3. So, and we're not even talking about option 3 anymore. So,
Well, and to be fair, I think what I heard is we're not ready to, I think even for me, I mean, I agree with you. I'd be ready to do something like that, but is it exactly right? I'm willing to say, let's get some time from council and direction from council to work on that, but meet the state's deadline. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, like, come on, let's do something here.
So Zoe, do I understand correctly that the bare minimum would be, right now, if the default in Lake Forest Park is you can have 1 unit and 1 ADU. The default of coming into compliance with these 2 laws is you can have 1 unit and 2 ADUs, or you can have 2 units.
Yeah, that's the commerce guidance for the absolute bare minimum. That's not what's in the state model ordinance. The state model ordinance is duplex, 1 ADU, duplex, 2 ADUs.
So if we follow the Commerce Department guidance, at minimum, every single lot in this city can have at least 1 more unit, and the majority of lots in the city can have 2 ADUs.
And the option might lead to more affordability than just going with the option 1 as the state. And I'm not convinced that it would completely lead to affordability, but I think it at least goes down that path.
Yeah, I don't think more density leads to more affordability without a mandate for it. I don't think that's what the data shows, and I don't think that's what we've seen in our community.
well, with ADUs are square footage, there's a limit. So that itself makes it affordable. Because you can't charge $1 million for 1,000 square foot ADU.
That's true, but with these new laws, everybody's gonna be able to put 2 ADUs on their lot.
Right. But the ADUs are still not gonna be overvalued. They're not gonna be over $1 million. Everything around in Lake Forest Park is at least $850. And that is just the way it is, and it makes it unaffordable. But if you have smaller units, which by law, because ADUs can only, what the max is like 1,100?
I think in our city it's 1,000. We have 1,000.
We developed the development code. That's my problem with the 2 duplex and no ADU. We won't build the ADU, we'll build the bigger duplex.
Right.
So I know it's guidance, but if you look at House Bill 1110 and House Bill 1337 and meet the intent, it's duplex, 2 ADU. Somehow Congress mushes them together and says 2 units or 2 ADUs. Makes no sense to me. But
But I'm just saying that ADUs have a limit on space. So you're not gonna have anybody that's gonna be willing to rent that ADU because it's only 1,000 square foot. They're only gonna rent that, or you're only gonna market value, you can rent that then probably at, I don't know, 1,500 a month, 1,800 a month, instead of $1 million home or $1 million duplex that's all decked out and you have a 3-bedroom and 1 bath or 2 bath, or, it's just a duplex. You just have whole lot more room to be able to charge more. So if you want affordability, then the ADUs is the way to go.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily arguing against, I'm just thinking, because you know, if you have a developer coming in, maybe they're going to tear down a house, and they're gonna build a duplex. Whereas if you have a remaining family that's gonna keep their house, then probably, and they want to add, you know, an extra, so then that kind of becomes the 2 ADU scenario. So maybe they're thinking that it's sort of fulfilling two different types of potential redevelopment you have. But I mean, maybe there could be a really nice scenario for a larger family to, you know, buy a duplex with 2 ADUs, and you know, you've got, you know, parents living. Well, anyway, I mean, that could be a really nice scenario on large.
I mean, I just know the rental market because our daughter was at the age where she wanted to move out and she wanted to live on her own. And I mean, rents are, it's just ridiculous. It's over 1,500, you know, for a 1-bedroom condo, you know, so, or apartments. And so with an ADU, if you're looking at price wise, you know, you can then charge about $1,500 to maybe $2,000 for a nice ADU. So that's, but the ADU size is only 1,000 square foot, but a lot of these condos that are being built is less than 1,000 square foot. And there's not a affordable.
So what's the question that we need to answer in regards to the?
What direction you all would like to take on that policy interpretation of what counts for the 2 units on a lot, whether or not that includes ADUs?
The question is, do we want a duplex plus 1 ADU, a duplex plus 2 ADUs, a duplex plus 4 ADUs?
I think.
Or do we
four is
just want 1 unit plus 1 ADU, 2 ADUs, 3 ADUs? Because if we're worried about affordability and we think the ADUs are the better route, then why not say you can put a duplex? Or you can have a single family dwelling in 3 ADUs.
I mean, it's gonna be cheaper to put in a duplex than it is to do the ADUs from a building perspective. Just throwing that out there, but that, oh, go ahead, Meredith.
You're gonna see a duplex plus an ADU.
I actually, so Zoe, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure that would be allowed by the code because you can't discriminate against the second unit. In other words, the second unit that you built with no housing can't lack the rights of the first one. So I think it's either no ADUs or both of them get to have ADUs. So, and let's say duplex is one form, right? I mean, but say it's a duplex, but those are now independent units still, they might be attached. I think they both get to do an ADU. Because the way I read the state bills was, you can't create a second unit that has less rights than the first unit under the whole housing legislation. So to me, it's either we're saying no ADUs with a duplex, or we're saying up to 2. Now, some lots, smaller lots, probably won't fit and won't happen, right? I mean, all of this hits reality at some point. But I can say we have a lot of bigger lots where you absolutely could easily fit, you know, 2 and 2, and why would we discourage that as where I'm coming?
So the question at hand then becomes, do we want to allow, correct me if I'm wrong, do we want to allow one house to become 2 units? Or do we want one to become potentially 4 on the lot sizes? Is that correct?
That's pretty much the question being asked, I guess, yeah.
Okay, and both are permissible. The baseline is 1 to become 2. Yanni's point is, if we're gonna do it, let's do it and allow for a little bit more since we are already liberal with the ADUs and allow those. Mary.
I mean, that's, but anyway, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I just don't want to make a rushed decision. And I also don't feel like we have the public feedback to make a decision like that. And so this is why maybe it just is better to just go with 1 and then work on this, really get you know, I had an idea, maybe this is done, maybe it couldn't happen, but kind of like the parking, parking things that we can do if you get a whole street to say, yes, we want this to, you know, maybe we could do that where groups of streets or something like that could say, we really would like to have the duplex plus and we could make accommodations that way where we're actually listening to the people rather than just saying across the board, this is what we're gonna do, without really, I'm just hesitant to go past this without further reflection, to go past level 1 without further reflection, because what will that do to, you know, parking and street congestion and, you know, sidewalks and water and runoff. You know, there's just so many things that, look, if we go from 2 to 4, it's just that's a lot. That's a lot more people. So have we reflected long enough before we've done this?
It's a lot more people, but it meets the intention of the growth management.
Which doesn't necessarily
One.
reflect our goals, or, you know, I mean,
I guess part of me is, you know, development of especially of a well-established and frankly pretty, fairly wealthy town like this happens slowly. Like, we're not gonna have, I mean, I don't know, how many ADUs have we even gotten since we've had ADU, not that many.
2 a year.
Or 2 a year. Now, I'm not saying this won't accelerate some new thinking, and it probably happened in some neighborhoods more than others. But I mean, we're not gonna have quadruple the density, maybe ever, maybe in 100 years. In the next 20, we'll see some cool developments go up that maybe, give us more guidance, for, going forward, do we want to change anything? But I just don't see it as a risk. I see it as consistent with not just growth management, but what the legislature has said, and, our representatives voted for that too. Ones who represent-
With, oops, sorry. So I hear what you're saying, Yanni. I guess just my question is, let's say you go down this road and we allow for it, and then something happens that we're not comfortable with, and there's an unintended consequences. I mean, at that point, the toothpaste is already out of the tube. We can't be like, oh, just kidding, let's undo this, right?
They could be grandfathered in and you can change the code.
Do that all the time.
So we deal with that at the time, or we deal with expanding, at the time, once we can put in more research. I mean, I guess I know we did the public forums, and I know we talked about so many things, and what we heard most, if feel free to speak up differently, but what I heard most was, we care about walkability, we care about streetlights, we care about sidewalks. Like, that was the, no question that is like a top priority, where we couldn't really spend a ton of time to dig in with, how do you feel about different housing? I mean, everybody knew that it was coming down the pike and we had to do it, but we didn't really get to figure out, well, would you prefer 4 duplexes, or how would you do the ADUs? And for me, I feel like it's incumbent upon us to really reflect what we were told and what the community wants. And in order to do that, I think we need to be a little bit more surgical with it. And we need more time to allow for that, which we obviously can't do right now. And so I'm wondering if this falls under the purview of, we need to research this more, we need to take a breath, we need to really dig in deep with this. That's just my input.
Ashton, I think I agree with you. I think I would like to see what the options beyond option 1 are, once we have some options for how do we tie it to affordability. And doing the minimum right here is going to allow 2 more families to move into every single lot in this town, because every single lot is going to be able to have 2 ADUs if they elect, or to build middle housing. And that's the intent of the Growth Management Act as interpreted by the Commerce Department, which the legislature granted the authority to interpret. And that's in line with the values of our community. We did that survey of all residents in the community, and you're right, Ashton, we didn't hear from people that people want more housing and more density. That was not the theme of the feedback we heard from the residents in this city. And I think we have an opportunity to do it in a thoughtful way, tied to affordability, which I think residents of this community would probably like. And I'd like to see some options for how we do that based on how other municipalities have approached it. But until then, I don't think we should be allowing more than 2 extra units via ADUs on every lot, just as a knee-jerk reaction without the data in front of us.
Yeah, Sheree.
So the way that I'm reading option 1 though, is that it's 2 unit per lot in a residential area. So that is the main house and 1 ADU. Or is it 2
No, it's
ADU?
two main houses, basically, like a duplex.
2 main houses or a main house plus 2 ADUs. That's the.
But if that's not how it's worded though, I mean, I would like for it to work that way, that'd be fine. But it doesn't say 2 ADUs, it says 2 unit per lot. So that is the 1 house and the 1 ADU. So the person couldn't just change their smaller-ish house and have 2 ADU. They would have to have just 1 ADU plus their house. If they only had like 1,500 square feet and they wanted to put an ADU that's 1,000 square feet, that would be it, that's 2. Am I reading that wrong? It doesn't say 2 ADU.
I think not in the summary table there of the options, but I think what we heard from Zoe is how we reconciled the 2 laws in the zoning language that we would put in the code. We would have to allow a principal unit plus 2 ADUs on every lot.
From the, to clarify real quick, from like the bare minimum interpretation of the interaction between those 2 laws is 2 principal units or 1 principal unit and 2 accessory dwelling units. That's like the bare minimum through Commerce's policy interpretation. But in the model ordinance, which is that ordinance developed in case the June deadline isn't hit, Commerce has worded that it can be 2 principal units and 1 or 2 ADUs. So that's the difference there with that conversation.
And the Commerce right now is kind of irrelevant because we're gonna hit the June deadline. So, right, so it goes
Yeah.
back to the bare minimum of 1 principal plus 2 ADUs.
Yeah.
I just think that we want to promote 1 principal plus 2 ADUs, because that just leads to affordability more so than 2 principal.
Yes.
If our goal is affordability, and if we don't start making that decision now, then when will we make that decision?
But that's not a decision to make, because both of those are the minimum option we have to allow.
Right.
The minimum option we have to allow is 2 principals or 1 principal and 2 ADUs.
But
And we have to allow both.
But if we're saying right now, all we're interested in is 2 principals, that could just be 2.
But that's not a decision that we can make, because that's not compliant with the law.
But that's how it reads to me.
That's what the summary chart reads, and it's a simplification. I think what we
Okay.
just heard from Zoe is we have to allow at minimum. Option 1 is allowing at minimum
Okay.
2 principals through minimum housing, through middle housing, or 1 principal and 2 ADUs. That is table stakes, and every single property owner can decide which route they want to go between them. Okay.
So, yikes, so where we're at. I guess for the sake of continuing this conversation, I mean, I think this is all really valuable discussion. And I know that Zoe, you need an answer. So do we want to just take a poll right now to see where we're at? You guys comfortable? I see a head, 1 head nod. Yeah. Okay, so if you're in favor of the bare minimum, not to include the ADUs, you gonna put your hand up?
Just to clarify, that's either the duplex or the single with the 2 ADUs.
Correct. 1, 2, 3. David, I can't see you. Is his hand up or down? Oh, okay, and then those who are in favor of doing it plus the ADU. 1, 2. Okay. We couldn't, I mean, we haven't had this conversation with Maddie and her comments, so we can't really add that in, but it sounds like the bare minimum is a little bit tipping over.
Like Maddie's.
Melissa and Maddie, we're missing them. So if they were in favor for the second one, then I think we're in a deadlock.
She says pretty expressly, she doesn't want anything more than bare minimum unless there's some tie through covenant or otherwise to affordability. She wants to hear from the consultants what their recommendations are to tie it to affordability.
Okay, so that's the minimum. Again,
Yep.
wanting more information around affordability and how that ties. What do you think? So you need any more info on that?
Not on that subject. I think we can prepare some materials if it's helpful for next meeting on this subject if folks would like it, but I also know we are up against the timeline, so this decision has been pretty, like, we need to make solid ones now. On path
Yeah,
forward.
I think it was said, I don't know, maybe it was Commissioner Meredith who had said this, but you know, more information is nice, but can we allocate a whole nother 2 hours to figure out this one element while still trying to check all the boxes that we need for our June deadline? I don't, unless you feel differently, Zoe, but I don't think that we can have that kind of meaningful conversation, especially if we want to get public comment or something else. So although the information is, I mean, we do eventually want it, but for you to prioritize for next meeting, I don't think is, we're using
Gotcha.
your time well.
Got it. Good
Just-
to know.
Because who will then help us? Because we do, you know, there's multiple people that do, we do want to kind of expand that, and is are all of our consultants, are any of them still available with the contracts that we have to give us that input, or are we, once this is over, are we kind of left on our own to figure this out?
I think that's a really good comment too, Maris, because I would just add in, I mean, to be really direct, and I don't mean to be rude by this, but this was something that we had asked for, I think at a couple meetings, and we hadn't gotten from Leland. And so I think that's kind of why we are spinning our wheels a little bit, because we don't have anything firm and concrete to discuss. This is all kind of gray for us. So would really like to have what we'd asked a while back. Can we discuss at our next meeting? I don't think so, but did you have something to weigh in, Mark, on that?
No, I did until your last comment. I absolutely agree. I wish Andrew or David were here right now and could have that conversation, because it is part of the scope and effort through June. If it's a broader effort, that would be a different contract, different timeline, different scope. But whether it's the bare minimum, what is it and what are the options, or honoring what I call honoring House Bill 1110 and honoring 1337. I wish they were here right now, because that's well within the scope. But it doesn't mean we can't get that. But it gets very difficult after March to do it linearly. So if we could find a way to get that as we're informing the bare minimum, that might be the way to go. Either way, I need a draft set of amendments in March of what the code is going to be.
Yeah.
To start distributing it.
And I will, oh, go for it.
I was just thinking that we might be able to find on city websites and things like that as they start publishing their results. We might be able to, you know, look for that on our own.
And when we spoke about it last year with Leland, they said they do have municipalities that have done it, including at least one they have worked with, and they can compile that and share that with us. So we had that conversation with them last year, so it would be great to see that information.
I was going to add in that the one benefit to doing the bare minimum is that it's much easier to add later along with after reviewing and things. It's just the annoying, like, it's a separate ordinance, it's a separate update, but it's not feeling rushed and you can really make a strong decision as to how you're gonna add to the floor. Feeling good with that, we can switch subjects.
Yeah,
That the March meeting is to march forward, evolve this, and then have that resource to cap off that conversation once and for all for the March meeting. Are we doing the absolute clear bare minimum, or are we doing that one step above? Tonight, I'm hearing the decision, we're not doing last year's option 2 and 3. That's essentially one, and clarifying, and then honoring the latest commerce guidance for the 3 other versions from 2024. And this is not Hunts Point, this is not Medina, so I don't know if that latest guidance reflects risk-taking or not, but it's different than what we heard for 2 years. But
I've had to stay up to date on the latest guidance. It's been a struggle.
But I think we can get to clarity on what the absolute minimum is, if that's the direction in March, and have the supporting code amendments with definitions, red lines and so forth, and March forward in the next step is Congress review, public hearing.
That seems reasonable to me. At March, we have some final code language to look at. Have some time to look at it, can give final line edits or suggestions on the wording, which we always have opinions on, myself included. But if we could have from Leland kind of options of what others have done, with the idea that we're not going to try to wordsmith it into code changes in a meeting, which isn't possible given our track record. Drafting code language by committee doesn't work. But with a fast follow, then be April, May, because that's on our priorities, it's on our, top of our list. If there's something additive we can do as a fast follow, even if it comes, concurrent or after the June deadline, we've met the June deadline, we're not reverting to the model ordinance, we've met our objectives, we've fulfilled the grant requirements, but we've also got the benefit of Leland's thought and expertise so that we can inform next steps as a fast follow on affordability.
Sounds good.
love it. So what else you got for us, Zoe?
Okay, I have a good amount. I think at this time, I would like to walk folks through the code amendments themselves and what changes were made. I do want to do a brief discussion regarding the subdivision code sections that were changed and ask the group whether those areas that were amended want to be covered within the middle housing ordinance overall themselves or as a separate item, because it is not on the same timeline, but they are related and work together a little bit too. It's also very technical, so I can try my best on this, but I do want to kind of just open that up real quick on whether or not this should be included as drafted within the ordinance.
What's the timeline? Sorry. What's the timeline?
The timeline for the subdivision requirements.
You're saying it's a different timeline.
Yeah. So I don't know, it's not tied to the comp plan like the middle housing is, so it's not that June deadline, it's later. I believe it's a year, but I don't have it right in front of me.
So what I might suggest, Zoe, is maybe we focus first on the code amendments that aren't tied to that longer timeline. We can get close to final, so Mark can have a draft next meeting. And then if there's time at the end, we come back to the longer timeline items.
Okay, good to know. That was just a question I had for this group because It is a complex thing, but we can have it as a separate piece. It does relate to the allowing for 0 lot line subdivisions, which was why I asked. Would folks like any background on the 0 lot line, or do we feel comfy with it?
Mention of it. Understand that, but is there a broader piece?
I couldn't hear anything. Could you, Zoe?
No, I couldn't.
Oh, sorry, what are you meaning by that? Like what it is, describing what it is, or is there something?
Just what it is, really, if folks needed, because I know with some cities I've worked with, it's like when I throw that within the middle housing requirements, you must allow for the 0 lot line subdivision language. Some folks feel they need to have a conversation on that piece. Others are totally fine with it.
The fence in the wall of the house would say.
Like you
Ashton, could
build-
you hear that?
No, I couldn't.
You could do a duplex and then split the lot right down the middle.
Yep. Okay. Folks feel good about that, then that's all fine with me. We had made changes to that section in definitions, but for the sake of the timeline, we can move on to the definitions that were edited under 18.8, which is where it largely regards middle housing. And I can share my screen. I know I have so many documents open. Okay. 1 second. Okay, in our memo, we did provide which definitions were changed and added. So accessory dwelling units, attached and detached, admin design review, which was a required one, condominium, just for the sake of including that within it, cottage housing, courtyard, since those are types that are required, duplex. This was a required definition, but cities can choose as to how they want to define it.
So where are you? Or maybe could you share your screen as we go along?
Yeah, I'm on 18.8. Let me get my screen ready for you. I'm having a little tiny bit of screen issues, but oh, computer, please work with me. Markup. Share screen. Right here. Oh, well, one, we're gonna need to assign different numbering on these. But these were the definitions that were added in blue with the requirements. And then the edits that were made associated with them. So for accessory dwelling units attached, we're going to add language regarding just exceeding the size limitations as to separate out between a duplex and an ADU, which was another conversation to have with this group today as to what size folks saw the split being from ADU to cottage housing. But this is just regarding the definitions right now. I can also walk through definitions or just totally skip it if folks have already reviewed them, felt comfortable with them.
I read the definitions for ADU on the size limitations, just to be by reference to our existing code on size limits for ADUs. Is that the right way to read it?
It's directing to just a renumbered section as to the limitations, yeah.
Can I just note that there's some new definitions in here that are invoking things that we haven't discussed or suggested need to be in the code, so they seem like they're consultant suggestions.
Which suggestions are you, I mean, which ones are you referring to?
For
I can-
example, you recommended that ADUs not be allowed to be used for short-term rentals. And then you added a definition of short-term rental. Tell me
That,
we have a problem with short-term rentals.
that actually was something I caught later by my team and was like, we need to have that removed because I know you all have not had direction or decisions on that and is not something we should have put in, so apologies there. If
Great.
you would like a definition on short-term rental in general, I could see
We-
that as being a spot, but just not that conversation about restricting or anything there, because I know that's a policy call by your council and everybody else.
We have a definition that's not used anywhere. Our code says nothing about short-term rentals currently. So we shouldn't have a definition about it unless we intend to write code about it.
This is
Gotcha.
page referring to.
The definition's on 53 of the packet.
18.8600.
Okay, and then on page 83, there's accessory building units may not be used.
Yeah, and my question, my comment that I wrote in my copy was, where did this come from? Who came up with this? Because we sure haven't said that. So I'd like you to see both that recommendation and that definition stricken.
Gotcha.
I'm with you. Was there any other definitions, Yanni, that you saw that were like, we didn't talk about that?
I'll get back to you. There were some other kind of recommended policies that I was questioning, but I can't remember if there were other definitions, so.
You don't know the code number off the top of your head? Just kidding.
Definition that I was curious about is the administrative design review definition. Was that from the code, or was that meant to reference kind of a current design review process that Mark's department has?
That is actually from the state themselves on what they are requiring be put in that it reviews to development permit review process through like city stuff.
That makes sense to me. I just wondered if it could be clearer by referencing the sections of the code that outline what that administrative design review process is supposed to cover. Because it seems like a pretty generic definition, and I assume we have some code provision that talks about what an administrative design review process looks at. And it would seem like we should just cross-reference that for clarity, so it's not ambiguous.
I could see about cross-referencing it. That makes sense to me.
It seems like the rest of the definitions, if I'm recalling, looked like they were just from the state law defining the types of middle housing.
Yeah, I will say condominium was one that was also not required. I know it had been subject to conversation and with folks going about duplexes and different housing types. We had thought to thrown it in, but that can get removed if folks don't want it. Yes, no. The requirement, I mean, the definition language itself was from RCWs. But
Yanni's point, if we're not otherwise using the term, I don't think we need the definition.
Agreed.
I'm gonna review the definitions that got added and ensure that they're used too and not just thrown in.
Thanks.
Yeah, we have the definition of middle housing that talks about types of middle housing, and so all those definitions make sense to include, but we don't have condo in there, so makes sense to omit.
Okay. I'm just gonna scroll on the rest of these if anything stands out.
I liked the inclusion of the tier 3 city, just for clarity. I know we talked about that up on the last meeting.
Yeah, sometimes that helps. Just with that understanding. Townhouses is a weird one that folks have run into, just that it is a required one, even though its definition is 3 or more attached. And then unit density is also recommended because it relates to that 2 units lot conversation.
Yeah, I would include it. Some of the recommended edits I have introduced that defined term.
With those definitions and the notes I have on moving short-term rental and the ADU restriction, adding clarity to admin design review, and removing condominium and checking against whether things are being used, do folks feel good about moving on from definitions?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to stop sharing at this time so I can scroll to the right zone and you all don't have to see just the stream of things going down. At this moment, I want to open it up to a conversation regarding the zoning overall and the structure of how the zones are discussed within the code. We had provided a table showing kind of the differences amongst each, and I will open that up, and I do have that very quickly available for folks to see. Regarding the differences in the zones. And this was done really when I was reviewing the different sections to understand what the differences were between the zones across the board and how they varied. And one thing we will be needing to change with the middle housing requirements is that all of the RS zones are currently just single family. And then beyond with the RM, that's where it goes into duplexes. With middle housing, because this is predominantly a residential zone, those will have to include middle housing types. And I think the conversation with this was if there were any other changes that needed to be made with these zoning types, with the inclusion of duplex in these versus these, and how they're written. Because this used to be the zone that was duplex and beyond.
Question is just about the RMs.
Pretty much, yeah. Are these getting changed at all? And I know we're saying the bare minimum, so that's where I'm just kind of looking for this clarity point on how that plays out. But these will be all very similar. Especially when, I mean, there's still differences between the uses in these two, but just wanted to show the group on how the zones vary.
Can I just add an error in the table, which is that RS 9.6 and 7.2, they do not have a frontage requirement. They have a lot width requirement. The only things that have a frontage requirement are RS 20, 15, and 10. So I think the 70 and 60 are on the wall. And I will say again, that I think we should get rid of the street frontage requirement in those 20, 15, and 10. The only effect those have is to artificially keep lots even bigger than the zone minimum, because they prevent subdivision of lots, even if they're way bigger, big enough to be subdivided. It's an artificial piece of code that when we asked about it, it was put in to prevent subdivision of big lots. It is a NIMBY piece of code from 1999 or so. Makes no sense. It was meant to stop flag lots and those types of ways of dividing property. I think that belongs in this conversation, not as a separate exercise, because we're trying to address both density, where can we have housing, affordability, and we have a piece of code that is just artificially meant to keep the biggest lots big. And I think that's ridiculous. So I'd like to see those frontage requirements deleted as part of our recommendation.
Just a question on this. I'm not sure anyone can answer it, but do we have any idea how many lots we're talking? Like, is this a 10 lot issue, or is this a 1,000 lot issue?
I'm guessing somewhere in between. There are several just in the part of town where I live. And I mean, just within blocks of my house, there are several that would be impacted by this. Or are impacted by this currently.
My neighbors had that experience.
So why, I would love to have this discussion and, why do you feel like it needs to be as part of it? So you're just saying as part of the recommendation that we give to council that we also want this to be done, kind of like as a secondary.
I think it's related. So because it is about constraining the ability to have, more homes, lots, density. It's not, I mean, right now, what it's saying, what it's doing is basically saying, yeah, you may live in an RS 10,000 zone, but guess what? You can't divide your 25,000 square foot lot because you don't have room for 2 75-foot street frontages. That's ridiculous. That's just not, that's not living by the zoning. It's we don't like flag lots piece of code. And there are gorgeous flag lots all through my neighborhood that were done before LFP put this code in. They were done when it was King County. They look great. And, yes, some of them create lots that are smaller than what the current zoning calls for. They're all still big. So I don't know why there would be
Time together, I can't speak to why in 1999 or why they're in there, so I'll leave that entirely alone. But how they fit into this context, if we are upping density of whatever sort, we need additional flexibility because we are not going to affect critical areas. So if you want trees, critical areas, and all these #1 priorities, you're upping density, a little bit more flexibility, this would be an example.
I'm guessing that this is in there so that you don't have an ADU in the front of the primary house. Is that?
No,
what
this is about subdividing lots. This isn't about ADUs. This is about if you
Well,
have
if you take away that requirement though, then you can technically build something that's closer to the road.
I'm not sure that's right, because I think the point is that now we're talking not ADUs, we're talking completely separate lots, so subdividing. So let's say you have a mega lot, you've got 1.5 acres.
Yeah, so let's say you have this big
Yeah.
lot, and then this is your house, and you want to subdivide, this property is the right size for this zone, but they didn't want this little, that's what you're talking about.
Well, they don't
right?
want you to be able to create a lot in the back that's accessed by just a driveway.
This has to be whatever, 70 feet or.
Each of the lots needs to have 75 feet there.
So it's like, so then this would be owner 1 and this would be owner 2. If it wasn't.
Right, under this, owner 2 wouldn't be allowed because they don't have 75 feet to the street.
It's the front of the house, 75 feet to the street.
75 feet this way, so.
And not a setback,
Yeah.
but
So, this would be.
with
Now think about it like, to have a lot in the back, you need a 75-foot wide driveway. Or a house that's right there, and
Can you think of any reason other than people just didn't want to have, but can you think of any legitimate reason? Because I haven't really looked into this, so I don't know, like, trying to be fair to what would the pros and cons be. Can you think of any good reason to keep this?
honestly, I can't, and part of it is because I think it's not transparent to the public. Like, it's like this little sneaky code. You might think you have a property that, someday I might want to subdivide this because I can. It's big enough, right? The zoning's supposed to say what's big enough. right? Or what's not too small. But then you go to get your subdivision permit and they're like, oh, but because you're on this curvy street, you can't create, both of the lots you want to create, they can't both have 75 feet, so you're out. What is that achieving for us? Nothing, other than keeping big lots big. So I did ask a lot of former city staff about if they'd known about this, and they had dug into it. They're like, yeah, that was basically when LFP annexed some of the last areas. They're like, well, we want to keep these big, so we're going to put this in because it will keep some of the big lots from dividing the big lots. It's like, well, then set the zoning different. They didn't do that. They set the zoning and then added like a little poison pill so that you can't actually even subdivide to the zone. It's not transparent. It's not. There are
So,
transparent that if you want to get at that, change your zone.
So one,
so it's, oh, go ahead.
what I was gonna say is one correlation that you can see when you look at the city zoning map and the tree canopy coverage map, is you see that the areas that don't have this requirement tend to have much lower densities of tree canopy. And it's probably because the areas that don't have this requirement are easier to develop, to this point. And the more development, you have a lot less tree shade. So that's one, may not have been the justification for it now, but that is a correlation that it has. The lots that have the requirement for bigger street frontage and are harder to develop have more trees.
Well, I guess, Sam, I'd say that's correlation, not causation. I mean, the reason they have more trees is that they have bigger minimum lot sizes.
Right, it's harder to develop. And when it's harder to develop, you have more
Harder
trees.
is different than with the zoning. That's a different thing. These lots, I mean, I don't agree that is a correlation. Harder to develop is conditions are more difficult to do what you can do. Zoning should say whether you can subdivide or not some goofy driveway, street frontage. Requirement. That's what I think.
I mean, so from my side, it sounds like we have one person, Yanni, obviously who you're very familiar with this and you've had a lot of time to digest and think on this specific topic. Is there anybody else that has a strong opinion or sense? I mean, speaking for myself, like just these conversations is really all my exposure is. So for me to say, yeah, let's make some change or suggest something alternatively, I can't do that. I would be eager to hear if anybody else has any thoughts. Yeah, Sheree.
So I'm comfortable with like making that smaller instead of 60 feet or whatever other shoreline, Kenmore, what their coordinates say, but I'm uncomfortable removing that completely. Because I feel like that now you're gonna have buildings really close to the street. Or
Mhm.
side by side. I think that I think we should look at what other cities have that. I can't imagine that it's zero. I mean, I don't think that we go from 70 and 60 feet to nothing.
Well,
Well,
and
no, our zones don't have anything for frontage. They don't have a frontage requirement. It's only the big ones that have this frankly bizarre requirement. So it's not like you have to have something there. You don't need that at all. You still have development regulations on access to roads and all that. Everything else still applies. This is there just to prevent people from subdividing as they otherwise legally could.
Not to call you out, but David, sorry, I can't see. Did you have any specific thoughts or anything that you wanted to weigh in on this? Just make sure that we're kind of hearing from everyone. And if not, that's cool too.
But I would like to know how much property is impacted by this ordinance.
Yeah.
And I'm not arguing that we shouldn't address it. I think we should definitely address it because I know my neighbors are experiencing, like I said, are experiencing this issue. So.
Mhm. Well, and Sheree, I mean, you bring up a good point of like, well, is it 60 or is it 50? I mean, that's something that I'm super unqualified to say. And again, what would the impact be? If you dropped it to 50, then, or is it just permitting now only 2 of the 100 lots? I mean, probably want to make something that, make sure that the juice is worth the squeeze with it. Once again, I'm not qualified to do. I don't know if anybody else in this room is either to make that strong recommendation. Except Yanni, you are recommending that it is 0, right?
And if you go to the City of Lake Forest Park website that has all the PDF maps, there's the color coded map that has the main designations on it. It's all of the blue, dark blue, and light green. So it's at least out in the city.
But not all of those are lots that could be.
Correct. Correct. This provision doesn't affect every lot, but it affects many.
Like half?
I have no idea. It depends a lot on, frankly, the shape of the street.
Okay.
On curvy streets, you end up with these kind of, you might have kind of a short street frontage, even though you have a big lot, right? So what this is saying is, well, unless you've got at least 150 feet of street frontage, you can't ever subdivide that lot, even if it's 60,000 square feet right now. That's what this code is.
So, I mean, does somebody else have something to say?
I was just gonna say, I do remember being on the tree board, there was a piece of property that was being developed similar, so because of the provision, because that driveway had to be a certain size, they had to bring down several trees that were protecting that it actually jeopardized the tree canopy. I can't remember the details, so I'll have to bring
Yeah,
that
it
back.
could cut that way also, because you would have to subdivide in a particular way that could cost you more trees. Because you had to create a 75-foot frontage for each lot instead of like a little driveway for the back lot. So we've spent enough time on this. Up here in a lot of
But I don't want to lose it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree. I think that we should definitely look into it, and come back to it. Yes. Since this is not needed right now, so.
Yeah, that sounds like that's the consensus of the room. I mean, I'm all for that. It's hard for me personally to say something with conviction with not, the full detail, but I hear you, Yanni. I think it's certainly worth talking about. Sounds like everybody else is in agreement with that as well.
Good to know. This is also the first time you all have seen this table, like in the packet materials and everything, so understandable.
So, Zoe, I think just a time check, Mark, let me know if we're off the map here, but do we need to wrap this up around 8:45, 8:50? We can't hear you.
I was gonna say, I think he said ideally.
850, 850.
8:50, party on.
Okay, cool. So with this table, I did want to get a feel for the room on whether or not this should be within the code itself. Some jurisdictions do it so people are able to easily see the difference across zoning. It's currently not in your code. This was something we developed to help with the review process and to aid in any editing. Yes, no, we can dump it in.
No.
I think no.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
no. Wasn't in there before, and we're in question.
Gotcha. And another one of my questions that I had. Next question was on the formatting of those zoning chapters as to how they wanted to address it regards to use. So I'm going to reshare my screen. We gave 2 different versions on how it could get incorporated in. Number 1 is through A here, just low density residential unit, including single family residence or middle housing subject to the adopted unit density being 2 units per lot. The other version was organized this way, with single family untouched as A, and then adding the a single middle housing dwelling unit made up of 2 units and any of the following configurations: stacked flats, courtyard apartments, cottage housing, side-by-side duplex. Seeking direction on what sort of formatting, because we would apply this to all the other chapters regarding it with our edits.
Of the second formulation was clear, it was very clear on what we were talking about. So I prefer the second formulation.
That's, I like that one. It looks neater, it does take up more space.
Anyone else feel strongly? Cool, that one looks good.
Sweet. Can check that off my list too. And then, because I know I'm gonna be making edits to all the subsequent zoning in that format. Last bit was ADUs that I had on my list as well regarding this sizing, and I'm scrolling down to that piece now, but also opening up to the group as I get to that piece. If there's more concerns with the edits that were made than what has already been stated. And I'm gonna share now that I'm on that section. It's section 1850.050 for the group. And because there's a lot of, I'll just share it right now. So this is where that up to 2 accessory dwelling units for single family lot. Any additional comments, feedback?
Yeah, I'm
Changes.
still trying to find my way to the spot here, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
In your note about House Bill 1337, it says like we can't mandate a smaller than 1,000. Current
Yeah.
code call. Can it be equal to 1,000?
It can be equal to 1,000. That can be the floor and the ceiling.
I'm not sure where part F came from.
can be smaller.
Why no accessory dwelling units within the shoreline jurisdiction? We've already said we're not recommending downgrading any environmental protections of critical areas. Why are we saying no ADUs in the shoreline jurisdiction? So that people in Sheridan Beach don't have to tolerate ADUs? Seriously, why are we saying that?
Why
I
Oh, no, it's shoreline is the
The,
critical area of the lake.
Yeah.
200 feet from the lake. So do we mean lots that are in shoreline jurisdiction, or do we mean within a critical area? Because we've already said we don't want to permit ADUs or middle housing in critical areas. We've already been clear about that, so I'm not sure why this is in here.
It seems odd to me, maybe we could just strike it.
Okay, I was gonna say it could just be the wording itself. I'm not quite sure if it just intended to be the critical area of the shoreline habitat or if it meant lots, so.
To Yane's point, I think the existing code already covers that, accounts for that.
Okay,
and do you think that as the code currently stands, people that are on the shoreline would feel that they would know that they wouldn't need this additional say, you know, you're.
Well, I guess my point is that I'm not sure why this is here, in that I think we've said, and I'm not sure if it's captured correctly in code, that one consistent thing we've agreed on throughout this middle housing discussion, and I guess ADUs too, is that we don't want to provide any, you know, oh, you can do these things in critical areas where there are buffers. We've said we're gonna hold to our environmental protections, right? So I don't know why there's this call out about ADUs within the shoreline jurisdiction, or it needs more specificity. To say, you know, or shorelines or any other critical areas, if you want to say that. It's not clear. And maybe I'm misunderstanding why it's here, so I'd love to understand why it's here. Otherwise, I'd like to see it stricken, because I don't think it's adding value. I think we already say no to critical.
In the AUD legislative, like in the code specific. Or is that?
It's not happening here.
I'll research that. There, an argument can be made that in shoreline jurisdiction, the 200 feet plus wetlands, none of this. This is not an SMP amendment. But I'm also not an attorney. All shoreline jurisdiction is non-critical area shoreline jurisdiction, and then it adopts its own critical area criteria. I think the greater question is, what's in the SMP, and does this ordinance modify any?
I say if you could research that, that would be great. I forgot about that weird thing about shorelines and critical areas being kind of different in terms of state law.
I'll research the SMP portion.
On part G, on garage space.
Mhm.
There's this thing that if you basically convert a garage into an ADU, the parking has to be replaced. I think that's wrong. I think you still have to meet parking requirements. If you can still do it on the site, why would you need to create more? Like, as I would say, if you've converted it, yeah, you still now need to meet on-site parking requirements. Now you've got to figure it out somewhere else on your property. But I don't think we need to replace the like 2-car garage. Now you have to add 2 more. I'd say only if you're short of what you're required to have. So I don't understand why that's written that way. I would say if you convert a garage, you still have to meet off-site parking requirements, period. Not that you have to replace the 2 that you lost. You just have to meet requirements.
Is that just a wordsmithing thing, Yanez?
I think so.
Saying replaced.
Yeah.
Must elsewhere on the property.
Yeah, I think it's as simple as that.
I like that.
It must still be met on the property. Yeah, something as simple as that.
And just a typo on principle.
Yeah.
Then, see, the earlier discussion with Yana and the consensus of the group, so we'll strike I about no ADUs as short-term rentals.
Yes.
Thoughts on this language? I think it seems to track what we talked about.
Folks are good with this. These were all the things that I had on my list to cover for us today. I know we jumped around a lot, but there was also a lot to cover.
I had another suggestion of a conforming change to make throughout these were the edits that I shared. So if we go to 18.8, where we were talking about that alternative language for how to frame the middle housing.
Mhm.
For 18.18. and I guess this is more of it was a suggestion for discussion, but I don't know how the other commissioners feel, but when we had 18.18, I had suggested adding a section at the end, so for each of the sections where we talk about the different zoning, we talk about the permitted uses, we talk about the conditional uses, then we go into lot area, street frontage, lot coverage, yard setbacks, height limits, impervious surfaces, all the rest of it. I suggested that we add a section at the end for each of these that says permitted and conditional uses must meet the tree canopy coverage requirements specified in the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code, and then a code reference to where that is specified. Just to be clear, that when we're talking about increased density, one of the requirements is still that you meet the city's requirements for tree canopy coverage on the lot.
Just tree canopy or other critical uses?
It's a good question.
Maybe it should be broadened. I would say both.
Yeah.
So maybe we broaden that to be both. I mean, that's very much, we've been talking at length in multiple meetings about, the need to make sure critical areas are protected as well. So I'd be in support of broadening it to be both.
Yeah, so maybe it belongs not in sort of one or every one of these categories, but kind of overarching over these
Maybe at the very
all
beginning.
zones.
Yeah, that might make sense too.
And I think we want to convey that to the council when we send our recommendation that, we haven't gotten all the cleanups done exactly. We intend to not diminish critical area and tree protections with any of our recommendations on housing.
As expressed by the community.
Yeah, because we did see that loud and clear in the feedback. So maybe Zoe, if you're able to kind of take that one away from my suggestions and see if there's a better place to put it as an overarching and expand it to critical areas as well. Any recommendations on wording, I think we'd appreciate it.
Awesome. Sounds good.
And then my other edits, we can just say for when we get to subdivision, because I think they were all in the subdivision section.
Oh, okay.
One clarification with unit lot subdivision, it was actually mandated in 2023. They kicked to GMA by Commerce, which was December, and now it's whenever your development regulations come in. So in theory, June 30th.
Oh, so it is. Okay.
By default, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So 3 different dates and they back off. In essence, whenever that piece of legislation became effective, the effective date in 2023, that's originally when unit lot subdivision needed to be in the code. But they had so many other things on there, like, okay, fine, let's amend everything else, boot it to comp plan. And then the differences in policy, comp plan, and development regulations extended it to June 30th. So, but not past that.
I was gonna
Well,
say that deadline has felt like a gray area when we've dealt with it, so that clarity helps.
So maybe given the time and that we're 5 minutes from when we wanted to be wrapping up this discussion, if we could come next month, kind of having digested what you proposed, Zoe, a little more on the unit lot subdivision. And if you could also take a look and see if my clarifying edits make any sense. They were meant to be clarifying on the definitions. And then we kind of review and approve final language on middle housing, and then hopefully have enough time to review and approve this as well. And then also maybe have 15 minutes or so for Leland to share what they can share for us to further digest on affordability.
Is Leland going to be there? Did I hear that right? Next in March, will they be there?
We can ask them if they have the availability to. I mean,
That's still within our scope of the contract, right?
I was asking, their contract's not with us.
yeah, their
Oh,
contract's
oh,
with us. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
That was that. Yeah, because beyond that March 11th date, we need to be past that conversation. Now, the other option is like the parking, I don't know if it's called parking lot. The minority report comp plan list of, this is the recommendation, but these were the short items we struggled with. If that style is also available, it just hasn't really meant itself well to development range. It's very specific. So, but we could do that, but past March 11th, the consensus of the planning commission needs to be noted. Option one, here's the cut. Option one, point, whatever.
My vote would be, like, we get to what we can get to by the end of March, and that's the recommendation to council on the code updates and the recommendations of middle housing, but we really do get serious about rolling up our sleeves and talking about affordability as a fast. Even if that comes after the June deadline, if we can come up with some thoughtful recommendations that come later that address more density that is tied to affordability, I very much support that. So if Leland can give us what we've asked them for in the past, some pointers of models to consider, you know, I would think we would all be open to having those conversations come up with that.
Yeah, I don't want to harp on this, Zoe, but I mean, as you asked them to join and what their availability is, I mean, to be clear, I think they did miss the mark on what we had asked for, and now we're kind of scrambling a little bit, and we are left with a little bit more questions than we do have answers. So to any extent that you can lean on them to follow through with those remaining items, I think this group would really appreciate that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
All right. Was there anything else though you needed from us?
Nope, I got my items all checked off.
Cool. We ready to move on, or should we talk more about ADUs?
At some point, you have to non-arbitrarily decide the maximum size for an ADU. On, sure. Yeah, get me 1,100 sounds good.
All right. Well, new business, do you want to take it? Oh, does somebody have a question? No?
Can
Mark,
say I
you
can
wanna
help.
talk about election?
Thank you.
Bye, Zoe.
Say bye.
Bye, Zoe, thank you. Do you want me to introduce it there, Mark, or?
Purposefully being dead quiet. This next item is absolutely not me. It's election or re-election, and thank you for your email, I think a week back, to get this going, but it's that time of year where staff asked you to consider those two positions for the next year.
So, and I'm sure you guys all got the email, just like Mark had said, but due to professional commitment and travel and family and other commitments, I can no longer chair. So would really love to hear if anybody has had some thoughts around it over the last week, and as this is something that you're interested in stepping up in. Would love to hear if there's any nominations or suggestions, or if somebody feels that they're up for it. Would love to hear that. Don't all jump at once.
Well, I have a cancer care community group that I lead, and it's actually has grown quite a bit, which is kind of scary in a way. But so I'm pouring more of my time into that, going with people to their appointments, helping them go through that.
Amazing work. But does that mean you're leaving this?
That means I
commission?
do not
Okay,
have the bandwidth to do any more.
got it.
I'm already leading that one.
Donnie, how are you doing?
Well, I'll
You're
say
on the
that
chair.
a year ago, I said I'd be willing to do either, and I'm hesitant to back away from that. I'll be honest, I'm feeling pretty frustrated tonight, so I'm a little hesitant to raise my hand right now. But I'll consider it. I'm not ready to say yes to being chair. I'd be happy to continue in the seat that I'm in right now. But I'm gonna need a little time to say if I'm gonna take on chair after tonight's discussion.
That's fair. Thanks, Yanni. Sam, Meredith, David?
Not wanting to.
Yeah. I'm already chairing committee at this point. So.
Oh, the CPAT will be over soon.
True, but Sam, what do you think?
It's not something I really, give a lot of thought of.
I think you'd be great.
Mhm.
I'd be happy to help with either. The only challenge is I have some work travel coming up, and so I'm missing next month's meeting, and I might have another meeting later this year to miss. But if people are okay with that, I'm happy to either do vice chair if you want to step up and do chair, or to do chair.
That's great, you guys. What do you think, Yanni? Do you guys wanna sit on it for a little bit and think about it, or?
Be happy to work with Sam in either capacity. I'd like a day or so to think about, which role, and why don't you do the same? And, maybe you and I can disconnect if that's all right, and convey to the group. Maybe we'll
That's
get
great.
more next time, but this will be our tentative plan.
Does that work with people?
Sounds
When-
great.
When do we have to decide, by next meeting?
It's not hard and fast, but on the 27th, the current chair has to give the annual report verbally with the work plan. So if Ashton could do that, then on March 11th, you can take it.
Good. Let's plan for that. You all right with that, Ashton?
Yeah, I heard I need to verbally give something on the 27th. Is it 7?
7 p.m. City Council annual report verbal. Fairly straightforward, comprehensive plan, and then the next agenda item of the work plan.
Yes, I am in Portland that day. My flight gets back at 5-ish. So yes.
I can give it for you if you like.
I'm gonna put a tentative there and see if I can get an earlier flight. I will. Do we need to make a motion for Sam and Yanni? And if so, I would move to elect Sam and Yanni as chair and vice chair as they decide how to distribute that.
I second.
Not, I don't know if we need a motion or not, probably not.
I've never done an uncertain motion, so no.
Yeah.
I don't
Oh,
even
no. We don't need that. Okay, see, I'm so unfit for this role. You guys will do great.
done a great job.
Yes, you have. Thank you.
Thank you for your grace, everyone. All right, cool. What else do we have here?
We have a draft 2025 work plan that's reflective of this nice little discussion and exhibit that I would like to erase tomorrow. It's literally the last page in your packet. It reflects essentially rough percentages of middle housing, recommendation on climate element, and then I don't want to call parking lot, but other things as we can get.
Do we, at this point, need to, do we want to keep this list as a running list so we're aware of the things we talked about, or do we want to dedicate our time for sure to talk about middle housing and really make that a focus?
I think middle housing is a pretty hefty item to continue. Majority of our conversations or majority of our work for the next year. And I should be talking because I don't know when I don't know what my.
Sorry, I mean for number 3, since we had talked about all these different items, but I think this group we're really thinking about, and while we have the momentum and the comments of the consultants, that we probably want to take advantage of this time to prioritize the middle housing affordability piece. Is that? See some head nods. So I don't know that we want to lose this list because I think this is a really great list, but Mark, does it make sense to really put a focused item in there, what we want to talk about?
Tools or incentives for middle housing affordability.
Mhm.
And just leave the detail out.
Mm-hmm.
And then this current list at number 3 will not get lost. But it doesn't need to be in the work plan.
How do you guys feel about that?
So the work plan would be 1 and 2, and then 3 we keep but don't assign a percentage to it? Or 3 we cut out?
I was saying 3, we cut everything out except for housing affordability and what using Leland's information.
There's no strict restriction that it's not listed in the work plan, so don't talk about it until January 1st. But if we know the 40% middle housing, we know the climate elements coming, that's the primary workload. And then if you take on one other large item, that's the other 30%. And then there may be other things that are required to come to the planning commission by code. We don't know them yet, but this parking lot does not need to be discussed. In other words, through July, you already know. It's a movement. But here's the key. 4 work plans are going to be at City Council on the 27th. Tree Board finalized theirs last night. Parks and Recs Board is done. CPAT doesn't do one. CAC is done. So this is it. So if you are, as a group, are comfortable with me going with 1 and 2, which is essentially through July, and then advising the council with the climate element after CPAT advises you, then identifying the tools and incentives for middle housing affordability and leaving it at that, that would be what you could bless tonight, and then bring it to the city council on the 27th. That's 4 things.
Yeah.
So we probably do need both of that.
You mean a revised document or no, a motion? Oh, yeah, thank you.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay.
Let's see, things.
I'll probably need to connect with you later, Mark, on the what we ended up, because I'm having a really hard time hearing, so sorry. But I will plan on, it looks like I can get on an earlier flight, so I think I probably can do the 27th delivery. So with that, does anybody want to make a motion to peace out? Call it.
Adjourn?
Second.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Safe travels.
Thanks, you too.